Hello, everyone. Welcome to our first workshop of spring 2024. This one's a little bit special because we actually have some special guests here today. And our topic is how to use AI responsibly, specifically within classes. And I'm going to go ahead and allow everyone to say who they are, and then we'll go ahead and get started. And we have some questions kind of planned, but if anyone either here or in Zoom have any questions they want to ask in addition to the ones that we cover today, feel free to do so. This is going to be a very much open for discussion kind of panel, right? So we'll start over here at the end.
I'm Professor Hidell. I teach computer science.
I'm John Nordloff, and I am a director of the Writing Center here at Eastern.
I'm Kelsey Hess. I'm a psychology professor here at Eastern.
And I'm Burke Ray. I'm a philosophy professor at Eastern.
And back to me, I'm Chelsea Post. I'm part of the library here, specifically the systems librarian. And so now we're going to go ahead and jump into what I think is probably the most basic of the questions that we'll ask, and kind of a big one. And if we don't answer this, then there's no point in doing the rest, really. So what is AI? Like, what is artificial intelligence, and how is it being used at Eastern? Kind of a combo question here. And we'll just kind of, whoever wants to start first can go.
This is probably the question that I could answer best. Of just the what is AI question. It's a really complicated question, but overall AI uses something called machine learning, which takes data and learns on the data. So it finds patterns that exist in the data that a human eye can't necessarily see. And then it uses those patterns to make predictions about future data. So a lot of the AI we're seeing now is using previous, like ChatGPT, generative AI, for example, is using, previous writing samples, the entire internet, to train, and then finding patterns in that data, and then using that to predict the next word of a prompt or something like that. And so that's how it's generating new data. So overall, that's very base level of what AI is.
Yeah, I think some faculty are working on how to incorporate it into their classrooms, either sort of accidentally as something like, oh, this is a new interesting tool and we can use it and also do our other stuff, our biology or whatever, and just happen to use ChatGPT or something like that. Others are trying to integrate it, maybe use its computational abilities to work on new digital technologies or something like that. Or learn how it's being used in healthcare applications or things like that, where it's actually integrated with the curriculum. And then students, I think, use it in generative ways and transformative ways. So either getting an AI chatbot to create some writing or something for you, or taking writing that you already have and manipulating it somehow to make it, one hopes, better. But we can talk about that.
I know for libraries, what I've noticed is sometimes students have been using it to help them find resources. So they'll go into ChatGPT or Google Bard or anything like that and say, I want to find resources on this. And usually what it'll do is it'll actually come back to you and say, oh, we can't pull anything live, but this is what we found. And so they'll kind of comb the past. So it's not usually very current articles that I've noticed. Sometimes they're 5+ years old, but they will find you some things. Usually though, what it does is sometimes we've come up with a term for it, hallucinates. So it'll hallucinate a source. And what it's doing is it's kind of finding sources that are similar to it, but aren't quite the same. And it'll actually spit those back out in a citation, and it ends up being not a real article. So I've had a couple students come to me and say, hey, I can't find this article. What should I do? I then will do some digging and go, well, the journal's right and the author is real, but they never wrote that particular article at that time, for those page ranges. So sometimes it's a little tricky, but it is very interesting to see how people are using it. And I think it can be used. I've noticed that sometimes the chat actually puts in language where it'll say, it's starting to catch itself a little and go, oh, you might want to double check to make sure that this is right. So I think they've started to realize that it's doing that. And so they warn you a little bit ahead of time, like, oh, just double check, make sure this is right. But this is what you're looking for. This is a general idea. So it's interesting in that regard.
I would just add one of the real basic ways that I found it. I've started using it this way, and I'm sure a lot of people are. It's almost really like a version of a Google, and we know how, like, search engines began as really, let's find a site, right? And so it leads you to a site. But more and more, I know over the years, I started asking questions of Google, like, where can I find a blah, blah, blah. But it's still, but the search engines are still giving you back sites. And so what I found, some people do this, is you sometimes, if you put into AI generators a question, it'll give you it's sort of doing similar things as what a Google search did, but it's giving you an answer as opposed to a list of ranked sites. And there are some apps that are formulated specifically for that.
Yeah, I've used it for research, the same thing, to find newer resources. So some of the AIs like Google Bard actually pulls from the live internet as opposed to Chat GPT. So I've used to find some more recent, like, review articles and stuff, and it has hallucinated a few for me. But I have found a few that were real and helping to stay up to date on the literature. So usually I'll look to track some certain authors and things that I know are in that particular area to see what they've most recently come up with, because I don't always know what journal they published in, so it's harder to look it up maybe that way. So I do need to keep on top of the literature.
Yep, excellent. So the next kind of question is, again, kind of a double question here, and we can answer this at the same time. And we've kind of danced around this topic a little bit. It's like, what are the possible dangers of using AI in academia? And then what are the possible benefits? Again, very big, kind of hefty question, but I figured we'd do them both at the same time.
I mean, AI, I think it can very much replace learning for a lot of, the plagiarism, it's going to come up. And so if it's being used to replace learning, that's obviously a danger. But it can supplement learning as well in a really valuable way. I use it all the time to help me take these big ideas. I was teaching AI last semester, and I used it a lot to kind of go back and forth with it about, hey, this type of machine learning model is hard to explain to students. Like, how would you explain it to students? And then it would give me a response, and I'd push back. And like, I would be able to have a conversation with somebody else who kind of knew the stuff and could go back and forth on and help me figure out how best to teach the material. And you can do that with, I'm not really understanding X psychological term. Can you explain that to me? And so it can supplement learning in a really useful way, as long as it's not replacing learning, which can be really damaging.
Yeah, so as a psychologist, I think of it in terms of a cognitive load approach. So we know from my psychology classes that we tend to be cognitive misers. We like to expend as little effort as possible. And this is suddenly a new way to expend as little effort as possible in writing papers. And that therein lies the danger is, yes, people like to think of it as the next evolution of the calculator, of the sticky note, of things that we engage with for cognitive offloading, for putting these memory processes outside ourselves into something that we can just check to see, oh, there's the right answer. But as we offload more and more cognitive processes, we do tend to learn less. So usually the goal of writing papers is to get you to dive deeper into a particular subject. If you're not actually writing the paper yourself, the AI is diving deeper into the subject, but you are not. And so what professors tend to see then is maybe elevated papers that sound like they were written by, depending on the AI, a master's student, potentially, but then poor performance on test scores. Even when we ask the same types of questions from the test to the paper, there's this large gap where, like, they got it when they wrote this paper 3 days ago, but not for the exam. So I do see it kind of playing a role. Students don't know what they're writing to use it for an entire paper or even a pretty good chunk of paper. But there are numerous benefits. So one of the ways I'm trying to figure out how to recommend it to students to be used responsibly, because it's like offering a really nice, tasty treat and you only want them to take one bite. So in my research methods class, they have to synthesize and talk about a variety of different articles. And for some students, reading psychological research for the first time, particularly in certain areas like neuroscience, can be incredibly jarring and difficult to understand. So you can actually, like, if there's a paragraph or a couple paragraphs that you're having trouble understanding, copying and pasting that into the AI and asking it to explain it to you in regular English. Say regular English, because yes, academics sometimes write using very hoity-toity words that I admit there's no reason it needs to be written that way. But it is very useful for that. I think a line in the sand that I like to draw as an illustration is don't be copying and pasting anything from the AI into your paper, but if you want to use it to supplement your own learning, to kind of help you understand difficult concepts, I really do think it's a benefit. It's just learning how to use it responsibly so that the words that you're writing are your own and you understand them.
I kind of have a helpful heuristic for this. Imagine that ChatGPT or whatever AI chatbot is your friend, and only use a chatbot for what you would use a friend for in class. You want to spitball ideas? Yeah, totally do that with a friend. You want to ask your friend to write your introduction for you? No, that's not a good idea. Now you're offloading to someone else or something else. Yeah. And I think, so that if you think about that, then that might help you to use AI in ways that aren't going to replace learning. They're going to help you in a way that a friend would help you. But if a friend's doing your work for you, they're not actually. Another sort of perceived benefit that I want to caution people against is things like a better paper or better results, something like that. I had a student who used ChatGPT last year to write the majority of their paper and justify this as like, I wanted to give you a better paper, a better product. But that's not the point of my class. I don't think any of our classes. The point is to sharpen your mind, is to improve your mind. And we can only do that if you give us your mind, the form of a paper, in the form of test responses, or whatever our assignments and evaluations are. If we don't have your mind, we can't help it. And so I want your sloppy grammar. I want your terrible introductions. Actually, I tell students not to write introductions for them. Give me a mess so that we can work on cleaning it up. And don't be afraid of that. That's okay. And if you need to budget some time to go and talk to your professor with a draft or something, do that. All the free time that you're freeing up using these new technologies, spent for good things, for things that will help you. So that's a benefit that turns out to be.
I'm going to go back. I wanted to go back to something Professor Hess brought up about putting things in your own words. And I think, as I'm thinking about it, one of that sort of encapsulates one of the basic concepts of learning that I think of as important in the writing process, which is a lot of times when I teach writing, I focus on quotation and paraphrase as two key skills. And so, even speaking outside of the AI question, the reason why I focus on that is because what I want to see students do typically and what I think a lot of courses are asking for us to do is take in material. What's this source saying? And then what do I think it's saying? And so quotation and paraphrase work together in writing to show, okay, this is the source. That's exactly what it says. But we know, for example, that you can quote without knowing what something means. And so paraphrase is, what do I think that it's saying? And so that's showing, and what it shows is really learning, because if you can take something that's in other language and put it into your own or different language, then that demonstrates a learning process. And so that you know, I think there's some applicability here with AI that we, you know, if there are, sometimes you might find that to be the case sometimes, or I'm having difficulty understand, you know, what is this meaning? And can you, you know, and so I can imagine circumstances where you ask an AI to paraphrase something so that you can see that, but then it's your responsibility really then to put it in your own words, to be able to show again, part of that process of writing is, I think, you know, we're trying to see, you know, what you know and what you don't, and seeing that clearly in the writing process will help your instructor to know what have you learned? What do I need to, you know, have I taught this appropriately? Is there more that needs to be covered? Where are we? And without that information, your instructor will have a harder time to be able to provide appropriate instruction.
I also think there's a danger in using AI that goes beyond academia and using it when you don't understand what it's doing. So like early on, I had a lot of conversations about ChatGPT, and it was kind of like, well, does it know the cure for cancer? And that was just purely not understanding how it works. And so I think if you go into it, like interacting with it without knowing that all it's doing, purely all it is doing, is predicting the next most likely word. It does not have any idea what it's saying. It's not conscious of what it means.
You mean
It's just
sentient?
that's a fair question. But it's just predicting the next word. So taking what it says with a grain of salt, because it doesn't know what it's saying.
Yep.
I think there's a lot of danger in approaching an interaction with AI when you don't have that kind of, you know, realization.
It likes to summarize the internet. And as anyone who has spent time on the internet will know, some things on the internet do not need to be summarized or repeated. And depending on the kind of AI you use, it might give you back some of that stuff. So in theory, it should dumb itself down, right?
And it could.
The more text that goes into it, it could actually dumb itself down.
Yeah.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with everything they all just said. I mean, those are the kinds of dangers, are the kind of benefits that I've seen just with people coming to me and saying what they've done with it and everything like that. And I do think that a benefit can be it finding sources that maybe we don't already readily have at the library. So thinking of interlibrary loaning books and articles and things like that. So because it's summarizing the internet, it's able to comb things beyond the scope of what Eastern University subscribes to as a library for sure. But then again, realizing that, oh, it's predicting, it's not really sure of what it's saying per se. So again, taking things with a grain of salt, just like you take everything that you find on the internet with a grain of salt. You just have to be mindful of that it's not some all-seeing eye that can see the future. No, that's not what it does. It's taking what it's being fed and it's bringing it back out. So just remembering that, I think, is important.
One thing it is really good for outside of academia is if you have a number of random ingredients in your fridge and you put them into the AI and say, what can I make with this? So much better than Pinterest.
So there you go. Yes. AI recipes for sure. So, all right. So, and this is maybe more of a question for our faculty members is, should we teach students how to use AI? And can we do this and still really expect academic honesty? So, we were hinting at plagiarism earlier. We knew that was going to come up at some point because that's the big thing is, so should we really, how, what we're doing right now, should we even be doing this? And can we still expect academic honesty if we do?
Speaking from a cognitive development standpoint, the answer is, as with anything in psychology, is a yes and no. So there are certain students that are more mature than others in developmentally speaking, and can use AI quite responsibly. However, the majority of our students are still technically considered to be adolescents. They're in a period of frontal lobe development where they're prioritizing short-term gains over long-term consequences for many people. And completing a paper with very little effort is very much a short-term gain. So yes, I do believe we should be teaching students how to use AI, and I think probably, I'm going to be optimistic and say that 60% of them can use it responsibly. But there will always be the other 30 to 40% who, no matter how much we teach responsibility, will also use it irresponsibly. So yes, I think we should still teach it, partly because student brains are still very much in development and they're building out their moral and ethical codes while we're teaching them other stuff besides morals and ethics. But I do believe that the danger is always going to be there.
I follow up, and I think it's a really good point. So maybe we can break that down a little. When you talk about the development aspect, what we're really talking about is what are we hoping to develop in the student through this, and how do we expect them to develop? Is that right? Yeah.
Not expecting them to have brains like ours either. I think sometimes we sit in these faculty meetings and we talk about logical and rational reasoning and morals and ethics, and we have to understand that we're in developmentally different time periods in our lives. Like, we're past the age of 25, our frontal lobe is fully developed. So yes, sometimes we argue about things that may not, we approach it differently from how we would have approached it 10, 15, 20 years ago.
I think I think it starts with asking the question, why are you in college? What's the point of being here? And I think there's kind of two answers that I usually get to that is I want a job. And the other one, which I think is the more true one and the one that should be more of the answer, is to develop to develop, right? You're learning so much more than just psychology, philosophy, computer science, math. I mean, you go to a liberal arts college too, in addition to that. So you have to take math, even if you're a psych major, right? And so I think if we kind of focus on, I think that is important to say and important to know, but then the answer to should we teach our students how to use AI, I think is yes, because of the second reason. I mean, even talking to alums that are working in the computer science industry right now, they use ChatGPT to do part of their work every day. And they're saying, hey, can you write me this code that does this? And it writes the code, and then the worker has to then look at that code and figure out how it works in his context and synthesize it with the way things are already built. And so they should learn how to use it now, because it is a tool that you're going to use once you graduate. But it will not be able to replace your learning in the workplace, right? So you have to, in addition to learning how to use it now, you also have to learn how to use it to synthesize what you're doing with it, right? So there's more than just learning how to use it, because it will hurt you in the end if you don't learn how to use it to kind of synthesize everything.
Maybe one thing to think about when think how to use it responsibly and sort of walking that razor's edge, so given developmental aspects that Kelsey mentioned, is find practices or find ways to push against the part of your brain that wants immediate pleasure. And that's you're going to suffer. That's the point, is you don't take the immediate pleasure so that you can get some long-term good that isn't as apparent to you.
It's the new marshmallow test.
Exactly.
This is the marshmallow. And you don't get to eat it right now, but if you wait, you get 3 more marshmallows later. Psychology study.
So do things like go the hard way on occasion, maybe on lots of occasions. And think about this too, even in your non-AI practices, right? How often do you sit there with your phone, or how often you have had one of these experiences? Number one, you panic because you realize you left your phone somewhere. Or number two, you've never felt that feeling because you always know exactly where your phone is at every single second. that this is a way that technology has influenced our ways of thinking and how we take pleasure in the world around us and our friends and our connections and the work that we do. Oftentimes and in many ways for the worse. So find ways of like, put your phone away, go to class without it, spend an hour without it at a time. Go out next to a tree and do your homework by hand instead of typing it, so you don't have access to the internet. I don't know what the analog would be for AI, but something where if you are tempted to use it, recognize the temptation. I mean, tempted to use it in a bad way. Realize the temptation and then try to do the opposite, whatever that is. Go the hard way and let your professors know if you need help going the hard way. I think they'll let you.
Academic honesty questions.
Yes, yeah, and it's kind of a twofold of the first one, really. You know, it's like, I think obviously we should still expect academic honesty, even if you are using AI. And I think that goes back to what we were saying earlier, where you use it to help you figure out a passage that you're struggling with, or help you figure out, how can I paraphrase this? You take what it says and you go, oh, now I can tweak it even more. It's sort of like Google translating, but like when you Google translate several languages down the line, but without the inaccuracies. You know, that's essentially what we're kind of suggesting that you use AI for. It's like, it's a tool, right? It's there to help and for you to let it help you, but for not to replace, not to take the place of you as a person using your own mind. But that doesn't mean it's something that you can't use, period. Obviously we expect people to use AI, but we also expect non-plagiarism and honesty and things like that. That's just kind of part of the course. So I think we do still expect it. Is it harder now with AI? I do think so. But that's something that we will have to cross, and the technology will change, it will grow, and we also will change and grow with it. So, you know, I don't think there's quite as much of a doom and gloom as some people think there is with regards to this.
The other thing I kind of wanted to say in terms of academic dishonesty is I think it's only fair, for transparency's sake, that students also know what professors are using to do.
Yes. Yeah.
I don't know if that was one of your questions.
No, but I think that's a good point to bring up.
So you guys should know that Turnitin, the place that you submit your papers, that gives you back the colored score, like yellow, red, or greens. Yeah. So that's your plagiarism score. But there's actually another score that Turnitin gives us, the professor, that you don't get to see, which is the AI score. So the professor can actually go in and check out, and it gives us a % likelihood score. So it's a % likelihood that this person used AI to write the paper. It doesn't give us the proportion of the paper that was written with AI in terms of the numerical value. It will highlight certain parts of it that it thinks were written by AI. So basically what this does is it invites us into conversation with the student. Okay, now we get to talk about this pretty much. So that likelihood score, it can range from anywhere from like 0 to 100%. It's more reliable the longer the paper is. So if you're writing a very short work, the score is a little bit more questionable. If you're writing a longer work, it tends to be a little bit better. It has gotten better at this from last semester to this semester. They've done some new algorithm, but it's improved. But just so you know, that is what your professors are using. Just being aware that professors are checking. For the sake of total transparency, I wanted you guys to know that that's something we have access to, that we are using. And it is part of the academic dishonesty policy at the university that we can actually submit that as evidence. Whether that is good evidence or not, that is still up for debate among faculty. But as far as university policy goes, we can submit that for the case. So just total transparency there. That's kind of what I want students to know, and that's how your professors are checking for it.
And you should be able to explain everything that you've written, right? Because I mean, I'm grading code all the time. It's not papers. There's no Turnitin for code. So if I see something that I haven't taught yet, then the student needs to be able to explain it, or I know that they didn't write it, right? Same with papers. If you can't explain it, you didn't write it. So that's a good barometer for you to kind of go through and say, even if you are using AI, like you should be able to explain everything out loud to your professor if need be. So I think that's because then you know it, then we know you know it, we know you've learned it, and you've still given us your mind as Dr. Edison.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of how we question students too. Is you can't explain a sentence that you wrote, chances are you didn't write it. We also look for hallucinations.
Yep.
So I've actually started going through and checking sources, like, is this real? Which is also a pretty good indication. So this is how we're going about things, and it's a new frontier for all of us. Your professors are still learning kind of at the rate you guys are about AI. Some of us know more than other professors. Some professors don't know as much, just like some students don't know as much. Some students know a lot about it. It depends on how much they've explored it. So.
And getting back to that idea of, can you explain this back to the instructor in this process? I mean, some of these things like academic dishonesty looks like it's kind of like a gotcha kind of thing, but it can look like that for a student. But there's another perspective is that, faculty and the university, we're here that our goal is to help students develop so that you can explain things. The content of the course is something that instructors are really obligated to make sure that they convey to students in ways that the student then has for themselves. And so a lot of these, the processes are really about trying to develop that. And so from a student perspective, I think there is that short term, I want to get the grade in this course and or for this assignment. But if you're not getting that, I know this material at the end of the course, then in a way, you're not getting your money's worth out of your experience here. And so, that's one of the kind of bigger questions when we come to that question of academic dishonesty.
And I've watched it hurt other assignments too. So if they're writing a paper, I actually do this sneaky thing where on my test, I reference the paper that they were supposed to have written like a week prior. And I'll ask a question like, what did you write for the paper? And like, basically give part of the paper back to me again. And the students that I've suspected of using AI do not perform particularly well on that question because the memory isn't there for writing that paper. So it can harm you in other types of assignments where you aren't able to use AI. So suddenly you get to an exam that has 5 or 6 writing prompts, and lo and behold, you didn't learn the information that you would have learned had you done the assignment yourself. So it can pop up even within a course if we're thinking more short-term stuff. So it depends on if there's a variety of assignments in the course, be prepared for it to work potentially for some and then hurt you in others.
If you're unsure whether something is academic dishonesty, so this is my policy for my classes is come talk to me. If you have a use case or hey, I've got this interesting way to use ChatGPT for this paper or something, I'm open to hearing it out. And we might, craft certain kind of conditions about how it's to be used. But if you're unsure, just talk to your professor and they will, I'm sure, be happy to at least hear you out. And this way, like you could find, right now, I don't think there's a use case for my classes for generative AI, but I could be wrong. And if you find an interesting way to help you explore some concept really well, sure, by all means, let's do it together. So when in doubt, ask the professor.
We'd always rather hear from you before instead of having to send the email afterwards. Hey, can we chat in my office about your paper? We'd always rather you send us that email, say, hey, can we chat in your office about the paper that I'm about to turn in? It works out much nicer for everybody involved.
All right. Well, then the last question I have is one that we've basically been talking about all along. So this is kind of an opportunity for everybody to kind of say their last words on this, as well as maybe for people in our audience to give their thoughts on how they might use it responsibly. So the whole point of our discussion, what can we do to use artificial intelligence responsibly in our coursework? For the faculty members, that kind of goes to how you might prepare your course. And for students, that's more practical ways that you think that you can use that we've talked about or that you can think of as well.
I used it in my legal psychology course. To
Yeah.
generate fake police reports.
Oh, yeah.
It came up with really cheesy names, like Jane Doe and John Doe, but I had to change, and there were some details that were a little bit weird. But if you're trying to craft multiple things and you want them to have commonalities between them, it's a really great way for making use of like pattern recognition and stuff like that. And I told it to make it look like a real police report. Now, it did spit back like, I'm not allowed to do that. That's illegal to think. So I had to put, it's for my legal psychology class, you're fine. It did tell me that I was commencing a legal act.
They was worried they was gonna go to jail.
But stuff like that, I have actually used it in my classes for. So anytime I need to generate some examples or things like that, I have my own examples for a lot of the material. But sometimes you're looking for an example that you haven't given before, and you're kind of trying to reach a student in a different way, and it can be helpful for with that. Or sometimes you don't know how to explain a concept and you've talked about it in very elevated language before. I'm like, okay, I need the for dummies version. Not just for my students, for myself too, at times. So I like to ask it for the for dummies version sometimes. For simple ways to explain complicated concepts like statistical interactions.
It's really good at coming up with practice problems or practice questions, exam questions. If you're studying for an exam, say, you know, this is the topic, this is what we've learned. Can you come up with some practice questions for me? It's great at doing that type of thing. I've had students.
You can plug and chug up my study guides.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've had students emailing me over the summer, like, I didn't do well in this class, but I'm going on to the next class. Like, I want to be more prepared for the next class. I'm like, yeah, go ask ChatGPT to give you some prompts on different programs you can write, and then go write them. Because it'll also give you solutions too, and you can kind of prepare. So it's a great study tool. And in that kind of environment, you are much more, I mean, the whole point of studying is to learn the material. So you are in the mindset of, I need to learn and not replace my learning. So I think it's a really good tool for that type of thing.
Just one heads up though, I have used it to try and prepare some short paper assignments. Sometimes the answer key isn't as 100%.
Okay. It is more accurate on code, I will say.
I have come across some situations where it made an error, like you gave the wrong answer. So just something to be aware of. If you come back to me like ChatGPT lied to me, that's not a real excuse for messing it up.
That's an area that I think even a lot of technologies even before that have had that problem. And I think about, for example, oftentimes we see students working on, preparing documentation references and so forth. And there's been for years tools for doing your references for you, which are, frankly, notoriously inaccurate. That they have not to say you shouldn't, and even before, not to say you shouldn't use them, but to say, when you get the result, you should look it over and see, did it do this accurately? Because ultimately you're putting your name, if you submit a paper or you submit another a piece of homework, you're putting your name on that. And so you need to double check to see, is this accurate? Am I using this as a tool to make things easier for me? Or am I shortchanging the process and submitting something that I'm verifying as I've looked over and I have.
It's like the citation generators, which you're referencing similar to AI. The more you work with it, the more you learn its successes and its shortcomings.
Right.
So the more you work with citation generators, the better you are at recognizing what kinds of errors they typically spit out. Just like the more you work with AI, the more likely you are to spot errors that can occur with it. So I don't discourage using AI. I encourage playing around with it and learning it, because it will come into your lives. But when you're using it for academia, just using it responsibly and not replacing learning or replacing your skill of writing.
Just add, try finding ways of, how do I say this, then I lost it. Learn the skills that don't depend on ChatGPT, but let you use AI in that way. So over the summer, I was using some of these research, these sort of search bots, basically, that are trained not on the entire internet, but on research papers, and include citations and links. You can actually go visit the papers. So Perplexity and Elicit are two of these that are like, it's not just everything, they're trained for academic research. But even that, it would get the source right, but it would hallucinate about the contents. And I had to go back and forth between what it was telling me the paper said and what the paper actually said. But if I didn't have the research tools already to be able to double check on this, know where to find ways to check it, I wouldn't be able to find the faults within the first place. And even I was just in the library looking up books like you do old school, and realized that
With the call number?
everything. Dewey Decimal is my best friend.
You nerd.
But there's something that going to a library and finding the philosophy of religion section or the early psychological development section will allow you to scan categories rather than search for particular things that you're not quite sure how particular you want it. And there's something good about just having a whole bunch of options before you're able to select books, rather than trying to tell a search engine to get you precisely what you think you need to know, and not what you need to encounter and discover you didn't know in the first place. So those skills are in some ways independent of AI, that they will help you to use AI well and responsibly.
I will warn you that the hallucinations are going to get less and less common. The technology is only going to get better. So relying on the hallucinations for anything, for finding plagiarism, for, it's not gonna stay that way.
We're gonna have to adapt, just like
Yeah.
it adapts.
Exactly.